Hey, what's up? This is Justin with Lesser Dog Tutorials, and we are in part 3 of the Metroidvania camera system tutorial for Unreal. And in this video, we're going to be focusing mostly on room transitions. So, before that, let's try to clean some stuff up. Go ahead and drag the animation states enumeration that we made before into the blueprints folder. And go ahead and create a new folder called Tile Maps. And then in the textures folder, we have that tile map from earlier. Just move that into our new folder. And then in the actual textures folder, create a new folder that we will call character. And then move all of the character sprites and sprite sheet into that folder. And then create another folder that we'll call rooms. And then we can just throw in the remaining assets into that. So let's fix a couple issues I found from earlier. The sphere that we used to select the camera still has collision. So in the collision area, under collision presets, change it from block all dynamic to no collision. And then now it won't affect where the player's running. And then the second thing was the alignment. The tile map is at 0 on X, but -10 on Z. So just change the Z location to 0 and make sure you reposition the camera to the center of the room. All right, so the first thing we're going to do in order to have a room transition is to create a second room. So go to your tile map and duplicate it, and then we'll name the new one O2. Then you can open the first one, and we're going to adjust the size of the first room to be a single screen room. So bring the width down to 16, and then just make it filled in so that there is a door area, I would say 3 tiles high on the right. And then we'll go ahead and have it come out 2 tiles from the edge, so that we have a little bit of a doorway. And do make sure you're drawing on the collision layer and not the foreground or the background layer. Now the tile map is a lot smaller, so we need to adjust the camera to be 1 room width. And then you can position it into the center of the room, and then obviously we'll need to make the player trigger a little bit smaller than that. So go over to the player trigger extent and just drag that down until it fills most of the room. Now drag in the second room and line it up on the right side of the first room. And then go ahead and open that up and create kind of the same sort of setup on the left side for the door. And that's 3 tiles high and then 2 tiles in from the side. So now we have 2 rooms right next to each other. And if we were to play, well, I guess you'd fall through the floor for some reason. Let's try moving the player start a little higher off the floor. Okay, so that was the problem. The player start was a little too close to the floor. So now it's working, and if you run into the other room, nothing happens because there's no camera over there. So if we were to drag in a camera and position it here so that it fills the second room, so now we just need to make the player trigger extent fill the room. And theoretically, this would swap the camera to the new one once we cross that threshold of the room. And it does. Awesome. So it swaps between rooms. I think that does it for the room transition tutorial. It does the job. So go ahead and like and subscribe. And what's that? Okay, you got me. was trying to bail out of this early. Okay, well, we'll just make it look more like Super Metroid, I suppose, if that's what we really want. So I guess head over to the camera event graph and the begin overlap section. And what we'll do is we'll add a blend time of 0.75. We'll change the blend function to ease in out. And then for the blend exponent, just do 2. And that should create the transition that we need. But let's go ahead and add another tile map, but for a door. So just go to Paper 2D and Tile Map and create a new one. And then we'll call it TM Door. Make sure you select the active tile set that we've been using. And make sure you set the tile width and tile height to 16. And we'll do a width of 4, but a height of 3. And then there aren't really good door tiles in this, so I'm just going to use this weird wood bamboo stuff to kind of look like a door. And then we'll just drag that over top of the section that we created for the door and make sure it's lined up. And make sure that on the y-axis it is at 10, so it is in front of where the player will be running. And you can see in perspective that it is sticking out in front of the collision area of the tile map. So now the character actually runs through the door and the camera transitions to the next room, which is very close to what we're looking for already. But we still have a few more things to do. Now we need to create a blueprint for the door. So in your blueprints folder, create a new blueprint. And we're going to select actor. We'll just call this BP_door. Something simple. So in the actual blueprint, we're going to replace the scene root with a sphere collision. And just drag it over the root and it will replace it. And then I'll just call it root. I am root. Sorry. Now add an arrow. And then we'll just switch the view to right. And then we'll set the length of the arrow to 64. And then we're going to add a box collision under the arrow. And we're going to call this door trigger left. And then we're going to add a sphere collision. And we'll just call this right spawn location. And we'll just set the sphere radius to 4, something small. And its X location can be 50. And that kind of moves it out to the right, away from the center. And then for Z, we'll just do -16 and bring it down a little bit. Then select the door trigger, and we'll set it on the X axis to -16. And then on the Z, we'll do -10. And then for the box extent on X, we'll do 10 on the X, 5 on the Y, and 20 on the Z. And then for the root, just change the sphere radius for that to something small like 6. And for the right spawn location, let's make it a different color. Let's try blue, just to keep things interesting. All right, so we can select the entire arrow and all the things under it and just duplicate it. And this is going to be the opposite side. So just rename everything that's right, just name it left, and anything that says left, just name it right. And then we'll have to swap some stuff around. So for the arrow, change the scale to -1 on the X, so it flips the other way. And then it should flip everything else to the other side too. Great. And now if you drag it into where the door is going to be, make sure it's centered between the rooms. And then you can see that it if you hide the door tile map, you can center a little better. And so you can see that the whole idea is that you will run into one of the boxes, and then you'll be teleported to the little teleport locations that we have, the spawn locations. So we just have to wire it up so it actually works. So over in the event graph for the door blueprint, you can delete all the nodes that are there, and we're going to select the door trigger right, and we'll look for that event that is the begin overlap, and then select the door trigger left and get the same one. So before we do anything with the actual door event graph, we have to have some sort of more centralized location to carry out all of the functions that we're going to need to do, because we're going to need to mess with the cameras, we're going to need to mess with materials, all kinds of things. So a better place to go would be the game mode. So head over to the game mode event graph and create a custom event. And we're going to call this event Room Transition. And this event is going to handle everything that needs to be dealt with when we go from one room to another. So first, go to the Metroidvania character blueprint, and we're going to add a variable, and it's going to be a bool, and we're going to call it isMovingThroughDoor, because we need to know when the character is moving through a door or not, so that we can pause any input the player may receive during that transition. While we're here, go ahead and add another variable, and we'll call it newSpawnPosition, but this will be of a type vector instead of a bool. And this is just going to hold the position the player is going to teleport to in the next room. Now take the isMovingThroughDoor bool, and we're going to branch out from that. And then we're going to place that branch in between the moveRight event and the compareFloat node. And only if it's false will it continue on to calculate everything it needs to do for the moving. So if we're moving through the door, it's not going to do anything. And then do the same thing for jumping. So you can just copy and then paste the branch and bool. And only if it's false will we continue to go through the jumping logic. Then you can compile and save, and that part should be good. Now head back to the doors event graph. Now we want to pull out from Other Actor, and we're going to cast to the Metroidvania character for both of these. And then from the character, we're going to set isMovingThroughDoor to true. And then after that, we're going to set the newSpawnPosition based on which of the two overlap events is actually firing. So you'll need to drag out the spawn location, and then from that, get world location. And you can plug that into the newSpawnPosition variable. And also make sure on the door trigger right event, you're using the left spawn location, and on the door trigger left, you're using the right spawn location. Next, we'll need to get to the game mode to fire the actual door transition that we'll be making in a bit. So if you right click and get the get game mode function, from that you can cast to your game mode. And then from the game mode, we're going to fire that room transition event that we made earlier. And then you can link both of the triggers up to this function. So back over in the game mode, from the room transition, let's just do a print string to see if the transition is actually going to trigger or not. So if we go ahead and save that and hit play, we should see a print string, and it looks like it does fire. So everything seems to be working. So before we move on, if we look at Super Metroid, when you're walking through rooms, everything goes dark and then it fades back in. And this happens every time you go through a room. Everything fades out except for the door, and then the background fades back in. So what we'll need to do is create a material that can fade if we need it to. So head into one of your sprites, it really doesn't matter, and then you can find the default material called Masked Unlit Sprite Material. And if you click the little magnifying glass, it'll take you to that material in the content browser. So go ahead and click it, and you'll see that it's in a folder called Paper 2D Content. So if you double click it and open it, you'll notice that's an instance of a material, and you can see that the default sprite material is its parent, which is in the same folder as the instance. So our goal is to create a copy of that we can use to actually fade in and out on our own. So if you drag it over to your main folder, you can select copy here, and it will copy its own version to your folder. So let's go ahead and create a folder called materials, and we can drag that into that folder. Cool. So now we have our own material. It's not applied to anything, but we can name it our own thing. And I'll just call it Metroidvania Sprite Material. So just open that up, and we're just going to add a few nodes in here to make it able to fade in and out. And so the path to the emissive color is the one we're going to kind of want to interrupt. So add a constant 3 vector, and then right click and look for a linear interpolate node or a lerp node. So we'll want to drag the return from the multiply, the top multiply, to the A in the lerp node, and then the return from the lerp node goes to the emissive color, and then that constant vector we made goes to the B in the lerp node. And the alpha is the thing that's going to drive the transition between these two. So hold 1 and left click just for a standard constant that we're just going to test. So if we did 1 on it, it would show completely the color that we made in that constant 3 vector. But if we did 0, it would go to the actual sprite itself. So we just need to drive the alpha to animate the actual transition from the black color to whatever the sprite's going to be, and vice versa. So back out in the materials folder, we're going to right click and we're going to go to materials and textures and add a material parameter collection. And we can just call this Metroidvania param collection. And then if you open that up, you can add scalar parameters and vector parameters. But what we want is just a scalar parameter. So hit the drop downs, and then we'll just call this opacity. And then you can leave the default value at 0 and go ahead and save that, and you can close it. So back in the material blueprint, we're going to want to drag in the param collection, so you have to make the window a little bit smaller. And then in the general tab, just select opacity in the parameter name. And then you can drag out the return node and put it into the alpha. So now we have the parameter that we can drive the actual opacity, and we can reference this parameter collection in other blueprints. So back in the game mode event graph, drag out from room transition. We're going to cast to the Metroidvania character, and make sure that you're getting this from the get player pawn node. And then dragging from the character, you can set is moving through door if you want. We already did it when you walk through the door triggers, but it's not a big deal to do it here too. Then we're going to set the actor hidden in the game. And this is because when they go through the door, they may just be sticking out from behind the door tile map while the door transition happens. And this way it just makes it look like they went into the door all the way. And then we're going to add a set scalar parameter value function. And this is going to actually change the parameter of the collection we made by selecting the parameter collection, and then select the opacity name. And then this is the value that will be driving the interpolation between the sprite image and the color we made in the material. So in order to drive that animation, we want to add a timeline node. And we'll call it sprite fade out timeline. And then from the play on start, you're going to hook it up to the set actor hidden in game. And then on update, we're going to be setting the parameter value. But we'll need to get into the actual timeline to create the float that drives that parameter value. So double click the timeline and go ahead and add a float track, and we'll just call it opacity. And set the length to 1. Now you can just double click on the, now you can just right click on the line near the beginning and set the time to 0 and the value, make sure the value is at 0. And then at the end, add another keyframe and set the time to 1, which is at the end, and the value to 1. So now over the course of 1 second, it will go from 0 to 1. And then let's add an event track, because the timeline finished node doesn't seem to really work correctly. So we're just going to create our own finished event. So at the end of 1 second, it will fire. So you just create the event track and we'll just say on complete. And then right click towards the end, we'll add a frame and make sure it's at 1. And now it will, you can save that and close it, and it will fire at the completed time. Now, instead of driving the parameter value using the opacity, we're going to actually do a lerp. So add a lerp node and set A to 0 and B to 1. And then connect opacity to the alpha. And then that's going to be the thing that drives the actual fading out of the sprites. Now you can save that and we can test it out. If you just run into the door, it would appear as if everything fades. And that's kind of getting closer to what we're looking for, except for the actor is not hidden in the game. So you'll have to hit the bool to make sure that that fires. And then if you try it again, now the character disappears and it looks like they go into the door all the way. I would say that the character disappears a little too abruptly. So we might want to just increase the size of the door. So open up both of the tile maps and just add a third column on the door wall. And then we can extend the size of the door by 2 more tiles. And then just be sure you center the door tile map so it looks all right. And then if we save that, we can test it out and see how it looks. Yeah, that looks way better. Back in the game mode event graph, drag out from the character that we casted to earlier and just add a reroute node and then reposition some stuff around so you can see it a little better. And then we're going to add a teleport function. However, you probably have to turn off context sensitive to see it. And you can hook it up to the parameter value, and then we're going to set the target to the player. And then we're going to get the spawn location and plug that into where the character will be teleported to. And this is the variable that we created on the actual player itself. Actually, we've done something incorrect. We cannot actually link the scalar parameter value function to the teleport function because that happens on update. So we need to take it from the onComplete event that we made earlier so that only when this timeline is finished do we actually teleport the player, because then that will trigger the new camera in the next room, and we don't want to trigger that until the sprites have faded out completely. And speaking of the room transition itself, if you go over and you look at the actual begin overlap on the door, we have a blend time of 0.75 seconds. So it will take that much time to get from the first camera to the next camera in the next room. So we'll need to add a delay in the game mode event graph that is the same length as the room transition, because we need to know how long the transition takes before we can start fading the sprites back in and then unlocking the player from being frozen. So now at the end of everything we've been doing, add another timeline, and we'll call this sprite fade in timeline. And it will play from start right after the delay. And then we're going to add another node called set scalar parameter value, because what we're going to be doing is the reverse of what we did earlier. So on update, drag it in, and then select your parameter collection, and then select opacity. So you can actually grab the lerp function from earlier and just copy it and paste it, and then just swap the A and the B so that A is 1 and B is 0. And then you can hook up the return value to the parameter value, and then go ahead and open the timeline. And then add the float track, and then add the event track, and kind of do the same thing that we did earlier. So you could set the length to 1, add a node to the beginning of the float track, set to 0, and then add one at the end, set to 1, and then add the node on the event track at the very end. And then be sure you name the tracks what they're supposed to be, so opacity for the float track, and then on complete for the event track. Compile and save, and you can close it. Now be sure to hook up the opacity to the alpha of the lerp. So now, when it gets to this point, the sprites will be fading back in. So when this is finished, we want to unlock the player. So go ahead and drag from earlier, and then create a reroute node. And then from that, we're going to set the bool is moving through door to false. And that should be all that we need to do for the actual door transition function. So I think all that's left is to kind of clean this up and add comments to better understand the process that's going on. So this section would be lock and hide player. This section here would be fade out sprites. And then this would be teleporting the player. This would be the waiting for the camera transition. And then this section is fading the sprites back in and unlocking the player. There is one thing we missed. We have not set the actor back to visible. So grab the set actor hidden in game node, copy it, and then we're going to paste it at the end of the teleport player section. And then we're just going to link it up in between, and we're going to make sure that the bool on it is set to false. And we can just rename the comment to teleport and show player to better remember. All right, and then we'll just clean it up a bit. And you probably caught this earlier, but I screwed up again, and the timeline on complete is what should move to the set is moving through door bool to false, not from the set scalar parameter value function. Okay, let's test it out and see how it works. All right, walking through the door, fades out, moves over, fades in. That is functioning well, except for the only thing that I would do is if you go into the door, you can move the teleport to positions, the spawn locations, out a little bit so you're not sticking inside the door partway. Then we can try that again. Okay, fades out, teleports, and perfect. Now you're standing in the next room and you can go back to the previous room. Great, that does it for this video in the Metroidvania camera tutorial series for Unreal. If you like what you see, please subscribe. And if you could, like the video, and then I'll like you. So, see you next time.